Hey class, and welcome back to the Philosophy of God, Week 4 at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. As you know, I'm John Studi, your professor, and in this lecture we're going to be covering the second way as well as the number of objections that people raise against St. Thomas's arguments for God's existence, in particular the first and the second way. Diving right into the second way, the text as St. Thomas provides it in the Summa goes like this. The second way is from the nature of efficient cause. In the world of sensible things, we find that there is an order of efficient causes. There is no case known, neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. So it would have to be prior to itself, which is impossible. Now, in efficient causes, it is not impossible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes, following an order, the first cause is the cause of the intermediate cause, and the intermediate cause is the cause of the last cause, whether the intermediate cause be several or only one. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no last cause, nor an intermediate cause. But in efficient causes, it is possible to go on. But if in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, or it's proposed that it could go on to infinity, there would be no first efficient cause. Neither will there be a last cause, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. We see things cause each other all the time. Things cause other things all the time. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name God. Now let's break this apart a little bit here. And so first, St. Thomas begins, as he does with all 5 of the ways, with some sense observation. And he notices in the world that there are, things that efficiently cause each other. And the efficient cause here is, and what he means by that is exactly what we would normally mean by the notion of efficient causes. As a father in the efficient cause of my son, I make this lecture. I'm the efficient cause of his lecture. I'm the efficient cause of the sound that's coming out of my mouth. We make we serve as efficient causes all the time ourselves, and we see those things in other agents in the world. Taking apart the different aspects of the second way real quick, we notice that St. Thomas makes a few points. First, he notes that a thing cannot be the cause of itself. He also says that in an essentially ordered series, there are a few things. First, an ultimate cause that depends on the series, and so that's going to be the very last cause that you see. So if we're talking about a cat batting a ball or something, the last cause, or the cause that we're looking at, is the cat batting the ball, and it's from that efficient causality that we see the cat batting the ball, which is the cat is efficiently causing the ball to move or whatever. That right there is the ultimate or last cause. It's also a starting point for the argument. We also see that there's another mention of intermediate or instrumental causes. So causes which cannot act on their own. For instance, the cat's paw couldn't act without the life-giving essence and powers of the soul. And then we finally see a first cause, or a principal cause, on which the series depends. And if the principal cause in a per se ordered series is taken away, then the intermediate and ultimate causes will also cease to act. And so in every essentially ordered series, what we require is a principal cause. So therefore, there must be a most fundamental and entirely uncaused principal cause. And when we put our focus on esse, as St. Thomas does in his arguments, and as I've been talking about ad nauseum in this class, this first uncaused principal cause is what we can call God. There's a few areas of contrast with the first way that I want to discuss a bit here. So the first way focuses on the effect brought about by the ultimate cause. For instance, the movement of the conveyor belt. So it's looking at this accidental occurrence. We see the ball. What we see is the ball moving, with the cat, rather than the cat's paw batting at the ball. So we look at the effect rather than the efficient cause of the effect. The second way, on the other hand, focuses on the ultimate cause. So it's the immediate thing that brings the causality to the effect that we saw in the first way. And so the final gear, for instance, is in contact with the moving conveyor belt. Or the cat's paw is in contact with the ball that it's batting around. And there's also different potentials being actualized. In the first way, St. Thomas addresses accidental changes. And so a substance becomes actualized according to a new accident-like color. So a green banana becomes red. A ball goes from a state of rest to a state of motion because of the cat, whatever it might be. So we're seeing some sort of change in the world. The second way actually addresses any kind of essentially ordered efficient cause. So they could be those things that are the source of accidental change. So again, back to the banana, the green banana turning red, or those things which are the source of substantial changes in generation corruption. And so when a builder makes when a new plant grows out of the ground from the seed, so you get a new tree out of the ground. That's the generation. So that's also a number. That's also the kind of efficient causality that St. Thomas is looking at. And then with corruption, you can think of the tree being burnt and becoming ash. There's also a certain amount of efficient causation that goes on there. And that's what St. Thomas is looking at. And then we can also look at it as in terms of non-generative causality. And so we would say that a thing, if there's an effect and we know that effect is caused, we can look back at that cause and ask, well, even if that cause existed forever, an angel or whatever, an angel is a kind of thing that is caused. I don't know how we could see that, but we can propose this, especially as we get deeper into the argument, that whatever is caused must have a cause from another, sort of like we talked about in the first way. Now, there's a couple of notes here, beginning with the empirical observation in the order of efficient causality in the second way. We find a certain kind of order at stage one. What kind is it? Well, it's not the ordered series at work in the second part of the first way, of the second way, because otherwise St. Thomas wouldn't have to say that no efficient cause is the cause of itself. And so there's something else going on, which is why we can say that Aquinas is not talking about the intermediate causes. He's talking about the last cause that's producing a certain effect within a series of causes, or within a proposed series of causes. And we can also say that this, because we're seeing these things in the sensible realm, that the order that he's looking at is on the order of form matter composites, although these things are ultimately actualized by esse. And so we see the form matter composite of the ball being moved by the cat, and then we look back and we see the cat as a material, as this physical cause for the new motion of the cat, of the ball. We also, the second note I want to make note of is that we have to have eyes. With the existence of efficient causes, we know these things are the case because of what we already saw in the first way. If you remember in the first way, it says that nothing moves itself to act unless moved, or so nothing moves to actuality except if it's moved by another. There we go. Thank you. And so if a thing, the ball, for instance, moves from being still to being in motion, we know that the ball had to be set in motion by something else. In this case, it's the cat. And so we already know that efficient causes are a part of our real world. And so instead of beginning again at the effect that comes about from these causes, which what St. Thomas does in the first way, he jumps over that a bit and actually starts in the second part of the second way, or the first way. Sorry, in the third part of the first way, where he starts talking about the nature of efficient causes as causing things in the here and now. We also, when it comes to the order of efficient causes, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, and the existence of efficient causes in the world, we have to remember the priority of esse, in that a thing, in that we can know that the existence of a new thing has to be produced by an efficient cause. Because if it didn't, then we wouldn't be able to explain why the effect happened at all, or why the cause is happening, and we'll see exactly why that's the case in just a little bit here. And on the same point about the starting point of the second way, we see that the existence of a new thing isn't produced by an efficient. The existence of a new thing produced by an efficient cause doesn't need bring us immediately to essay subsistence. And so when we see the ball moving, we don't need to automatically think, oh, then therefore God exists. I mean, we could get there if we simply look at the essay of the ball itself and ask questions about that. But we can take a bit of a detour here and say, okay, well, there's clearly a cause for the ball's motion in the material order, in the physical order, which is namely the cat and the cat's paw. And so we don't have to go immediately to God from the ball, but we can look at, hey, there's this order of efficient causes. And if we also remember that as the act of motion, the essay has some measure of dependency on the motion. And this dependency is not one that gives something to the essay, but constricts it or reduces it to some kind. And so again, we have to remember that the way that the ball is moving, the final effect that we're looking at is determined by the thing that's causing it and the nature of the subject of the motion itself. But also that something about the cause or something about the effect can tell us something about the cause. And then when we turn to the nature of the cause, we see that it's the ball's in motion. We can say, okay, well, something already in motion, formal motion, going from one place to another, must be the cause. And we can look back and go, oh, look, it's a cat. So we can say that, hey, this cat caused the ball to move. And the way that he batted the ball is in a way that a cat does it. And so we look at the last efficient cause, so the one that's immediately preceding the effect, and say, okay, well, it's a cause in the cat sort of way. And so everything about that cause in the cat sort of way constricts, because of all the operations of the cat come from its essence, constricts the existence of motion, or the existence of this series of new motion to a certain range, like we've talked about before. And we can also take a look here at some of the insights of natural philosophy on the level of form to see what sort of thing is being caused to exist here. So we're looking at the cat. But in metaphysics, we always have to remember what we're doing. We take those insights from natural philosophy and then we give them a new and fresh perspective, and that is that we look at these things through the lens of Hobbes' essay. Hence, again, we can trace the actions of efficient cause through the limited to something which itself is uncaused in its essay. So that's going to be ipsum esse subsistens. And so the second way begins with the series of efficient causes, which is the third stage. And this is where the Secunda Via posits a mover called per aliud. So that's a mover through another. So the cat is moved by another. So that's where St. Thomas says that either the second mover or whatever is either moved or it's not moved. And then in this case, we're looking at the cat and we're saying, okay, either the cat, which is the efficient cause of the ball moving, is either the efficient cause of itself or something else causes it. Great. And again, this is where St. Thomas talks about the man moves a stick, which moves a stone. But he says again that the priority of essay is because of the priority of essay at this point, we can actually reduce efficient causes to ipsum esse subsistens, as we discussed before, with respect to the first way and the de ante argument. So once we get to the question of, well, this cat, does it cause itself to exist? The answer is obviously no. And so the second stage argues that the efficient causes that we're looking at are ones that are the immediate cause of the effects that we saw in the first way. And the second stage also argues, real quick, that there is no thing which is the cause of itself. And we'll cover that in just a moment here. So there is no thing that can be the cause of itself. Great. But why is this the case? And there's a number of reasons for this. First, a thing cannot be in act and in potency at the same time in the same way. The ball cannot be actually pink, or cannot be potentially pink and actually pink at the same time in the same way. That's nonsense. And nor can the ball be pink and also actually be potentially pink, and causing its potential pinkiness to become actually pink. If so, again, this would be saying that the ball is pink and not pink in the same way, in the same respect, the same time. But that's just patently absurd. or another way to think about this is that St. Thomas says that that motion is the act of the potential insofar as it is potential. And what that means is that it's pointing into that continual incompleteness of a motion. And so if the ball were to cause itself to go from red to pink, it would have to have somehow the power to give itself a form that it does not have while it's transitioning from red to pink, in order to actually obtain that form of pinkness, again, which is absurd. Another way of putting this is that a thing simply cannot give what it does not have. And so when we bring this down to the level of essay again, we say that if a thing does not have essay by its own nature, then it doesn't exist and couldn't do anything to cause its own existence, period. Remember that causes can either be per se, that is, they can have the actuality under question in their own respect, or essentially. So, for instance, the motor has motion in itself, or through another, which is to say that the efficient cause can have their causality causing it by another, such as how the gears in a conveyor belt have their motion through the agency of the motor. And so unless there is a source, an ultimate grounding source of the effect that we're looking at, or of the efficient causality that we're looking at, the powers that these efficient causes have, then we won't be able to find a reason or an explanation for the efficient causality that we do observe. In fact, we wouldn't even observe it at all. So the gears wouldn't be able to move themselves or to serve as efficient causes of the belt moving, were it not for the agency of the motor. Now, St. Thomas, in his argument, says that if a thing were to be the efficient cause of itself, it has to be prior. Well, what does St. Thomas mean by prior? Often when we think about prior, we think of it in terms of previous. There was a previous, that it was there previously in time. So we could say, I was born prior to all my brothers and sisters, which actually isn't the case for me, because I'm the middle child. Sad. But this kind of thing would be an excellent World Series. People are like, I was born before my father was born. That kind of thing is impossible. Gets you into the whole like crazy, grandfather paradoxes and whatnot. But this isn't what St. Thomas is talking about at all. St. Thomas is talking about a metaphysical priority. And so when he's looking at this, he's thinking about this as an essentially ordered series. So what is prior? Whatever is prior in this series is metaphysically dependent on, what is posterior is metaphysically dependent on that which is metaphysically prior. So the motion of the gears, for example, is posterior, and the activity of the motor is prior. So I'm going to edit this real quick here, just to make this clear. Because I typed that wrong. Forgive me here. Okay, what is prior is metaphysically, I'm going to say posterior. Metaphysically dependent on what is prior. Thanks, you guys. You're the best. There we go. So again, when St. Thomas talks about prior, he's talking about a metaphysical order. So within even an individual thing, the form is prior to the matter, right? And the form of the matter substance is prior to any accident. And so the accident is necessarily dependent upon the existence of the substance in order for the accident to exist at all. Red doesn't exist out there. It exists in something. You won't find a redness form just like floating out in the ether. No, it's not possible. You find a red apple. You find a red ball. You find somebody's red hair. You find red in things. And another example of this is again that so to say that the red hair, the red of the ball is prior to the ball itself is just absolute nonsense. And the motion of the gears is posterior, so it comes after the activity of the motor, which is prior to the motion of the gears. And so again, you can say that the motion of the gears explains the motion of the motor, which explains the motion of the gears. You get the circular vicious regress, where we talking about that again in Mone here. And St. Thomas and the Summa Contra Natiles, once again, I think that Summa Contra Natiles is an absolutely wonderful resource to understand St. Thomas's arguments for God's existence even better, because he pulls them out in a much more detailed manner. Although, to tell you the truth, they're a lot harder and more confusing. Hence, we stay with the 5 ways within the Summa Theologiae. But he says that that for a thing to be prior to itself would be impossible because in their notions, the existence of the cause is prior to that of the effect. If then something were the cause of its esse, it would have to be understood to be esse before it had esse, which is impossible. And so whatever the thing would be, so the cat, for instance, if it's going to be the efficient cause of itself, would have to exist as capable of granting another thing esse before the esse had first been instantiated in the cat itself. And so this is just crazy. And this is especially crazy if you remember that everything about an essence, about a substance, is dependent on its first having esse. There's a certain order, and if you remember that back in the second week, first week, or third week, I had that image of, it looks like kind of like a target with esse and actus essendi in the middle, and then the substance around it, and then the essence with the form and the matter. There's a certain order that the structure of a being, metaphysically speaking, has to all line up. You can't, if you take away the foundation of a building, it's going to collapse. And so in the same way, you take away the esse, then everything else of the substance, then everything else in the substance is going to collapse immediately as well. Now, I want to press this a little bit further here. Imagine with me, if you will, that you locked your keys in your car. Now, I've done this before. In fact, the worst I've ever done was I was staying at a friend's house, and that night, their brother was gone, and so I parked my car in their garage, which I normally don't do. And so when I left, I realized that I didn't have my key for my car, and the garage door was locked. And so I had to first get into the house. But that anyway, sorry, I'm move past that story. It was a very silly story. Anyway, so imagine that you are locked outside of your car, but you notice that your keys are in your car. Well, here's a problem. You need to get your keys to get into your car. But in order to do that, you need to open the door first. But to do that, you need to unlock the door. But you need your keys to unlock the door. You see the problem? It's a huge problem. You're never going to get those keys. Sorry. Or, sticking with a similar analogy, when you're unlocking the door with your key, think about what's the causal order. Is it you turning the key, which turns the tumblers that unlock the door, or is it the door unlocking that moves the tumblers that turns the key that turns your hand? It doesn't work that way, because then you'd be basically saying the unlocking of the door is the reason why you unlocked it in the first place. This is just nonsense. It's the exact same way with any finite essence. Even after it's been given esse, the power of its essence is simply not adequate to cause esse, because it has to presuppose its own esse. And so when we see that there's an order of efficient causes, St. Thomas says that this can be taken in a few different ways. It could either immediately terminate in the first cause, which would be God, because he has no cause for his own existence, which means he's essentially existence, or it can go on to infinity, or there rather can be a regress of sorts. And now we've hit this a billion times, and the main point is that you can't have an order of efficient causes which derive their power to be efficient causes from something else. In the same way, you can't have a bunch of boxcars piled up together, no matter how many there are, without some initial first cause, an engine, gravity, an electrified railing, to give these things, these boxcars, something that they do not have in themselves. It doesn't matter how many you stack up together. 0 plus 0 plus 0 all the way to infinity is going to equal 0. And so hence there has to be a first underived cause of existence, which, if it's underived, means that its existence is something that is essential to it. So its existence is identical to its essence. And ultimately, an infinite regress denies what we already know to be required by the effect. And what that is that if we see a ball moving, we know that balls don't move themselves. And if we give an infinite regress to explain this, then we're actually removing the very source of motion from the whole series in itself. And since there has to be something which can impart motion in and of itself in order to have the ball moving at all, then by removing some first unmoved mover or first uncaused cause, we're actually denying the existence of the thing that's necessary for the effect to exist at all. But you guys have covered this a million times. And so why in the world do we call this God? Well, remember that Aquinas' first and second ways are existential. So we need to interpret them in ways, interpret each of the 5 ways in terms of the observed phenomena as actually existing and focus on that notion of esse. But existing things that could potentially not exist. And so again, you're looking at a series of efficient causes which don't have to be efficient causes, that don't have to be able to give existence even if it's in an accidental way. And so we are really tracing essentially ordered causal series back to the principal cause of existence, which would be God. And this is exactly what we call God. And there's a couple reasons for this. I'm going to dive right into that in a minute here to get a little more clear on the notion of why whatever is the efficient cause of motion or efficient cause of efficient causes must be God. And so since existence is the most fundamental actuality, that is to say that it is the whatever is the cause of existence is the most fundamental and actual cause. And since without this cause, nothing else would exist, even for a moment. Let me reword that real quick here. Existence is the most fundamental actuality, without which nothing could possibly exist. Without existence, there is nothing, period, full stop, end of discussion. But, so therefore, whatever is the cause of esse is going to be the most fundamental cause of all things and of all other causes. And so everything derives its ability to be a cause from the cause of esse, because all these secondary causes first presuppose their own esse. So we discover a first principle that is the cause of esse itself. And as the cause of esse, it is also the continuous creator of the universe, because creation of St. Thomas is the notion of creating something from nothing, that giving existence to something without any other presupposed matter, nothing that you're working on. And essences, we'll recall, in themselves are nothing. They could potentially exist, but they can only potentially exist insofar as they are logically possible. And what that means for us is that we can say that St. Thomas or that God is the creator because he brings these substances into being from nothing. And it's not just the esse he makes, but it's the whole thing. So God is the creator of the universe as well. So now why do we call this God? We can remember that in the act of judgment, we grasp is where we first grasp the notion of existence. We see that things exist. There is a cat over there, as in there is a cat over there. So we're looking at that copula is, it's a form of to be. So there's a to be. But then we reflect and conceptualize that existence or esse is the act of all actualities, the perfection of all perfections. And we also realize that esse in itself is not limited. What limits esse? Just considered, precisely and abstractly in itself. Its actuality, perfection, is completely unlimited and infinite. And so if we happen to find a thing which just is esse subsisting in itself, or something whose essence is its esse, then we have found something with every perfection of esse to an unlimited degree. Which is why St. Thomas goes on to say in De Ente that God has all the perfections which are in every genus, so all the perfections of everything that could possibly be. This is why he is called simply perfect. As the philosopher and the commentator say in Book 5 of the Metaphysics, but he has these perfections in a more excellent way than all things, because in him they are one, whereas in all things they have diversity. And this is so because all these perfections belong to him according to his simple existence, or esse. If someone could perform the operations of all qualities through one quality, then he would have every quality in that one quality. So too, God has all these perfections in his existence itself. So when it comes to goodness, truth, uh, unity, or intelligence or power, God has all these sorts of powers. God has all these sorts of perfections in an unlimited and unqualified sense. And we can know that because we look at him as the cause of esse, as the cause of the act of existence, and therefore having it essentially within himself. And since esse is the act of all acts and the perfection of all perfections, whatever is unlimited esse itself, which would be God, must have all these qualities that we find in creatures, but to an unlimited and perfect degree. Bring up a few objections real quick here. So, first objection. This one is frequently brought up with respect to the first way because it talks about the notion of motion. That rhymed. Sorry. Doesn't inertia prove that objects can stay in motion without a mover? Well, of course. But inertia only describes the fact that things tend to remain in motion, not why they remain in motion. So it's an observed reality. It's something that we see. It describes rather than explains. What we have to point to ultimately is the nature of the thing. And so and additionally, and I'll talk about that last part in a moment, the potential trajectory of an object is always being actualized by the various elements of that projectile's environment. And so when you throw a ball, it flies through the air and it has a curve in it, think of a pitcher, because of the way that it's spinning. And the way that it's spinning pushes on the air, but moves the air in such a way that the air causes the air resists it and pushes it over to the right or the left side, down into the catcher's mitt. And so whatever is being actualized or in motion in any way is always being actualized in something. And this is something important. So when we talk about inertia doesn't exist in reality. And what I mean by that is this. So when we say something like every object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force, or every motion at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force, that's true. That's absolutely true. So if you had a complete vacuum and you threw somehow you threw a ball into it, that ball would go on forever. But the problem is, do we live in a complete vacuum? No, we don't. When you throw that ball in the real world, you're actualizing it in one way. You're accelerating it first, and then you're letting it go. But then immediately after you let it go, it's being actualized in a different way. It's being actualized by its deceleration. You might still be going pretty fast, but it's slowing down because the resistance of the air is causing it to lose the motion that you put into it. And so in the real world, we don't see these abstract notions of inertia actually take place. And so when somebody makes an objection from a physical theory like Newton's first law of motion, what they're doing is they're placing the argument somewhere outside of the realm of real things, but only in the realm of something that you've cognized, something that you're thinking about. But what we need to do as metaphysicians is bring things back to the here and now, to the real world that's in front of us, with real principles of motion and principles of being. How do things act in the real world, and what are their causes rather than their explanations or descriptions? And the third point here is that the inertial motion actually presupposes the nature of the mobile thing. So the mobile thing at least has some potency for its continued motion. Take, for instance, a ball. You throw the ball is a physical thing, and therefore one of the principles that governs it, or at least one of the things that we can describe it with, are the various principles of inertia. And so it has the capacity for motion to some extent. And so when you put it in motion with your hand, even though it can't produce motion itself, it remains in motion because it's already a thing in motion even before you pick it up and throw it. It's just in motion in a different way. And that relates to another objection down the line here. Second objection that comes from science. So doesn't quantum mechanics prove that things don't need a cause? For instance, you have the you look at the uranium-238 atom, and when after a certain point in time, there is a generation of an alpha particle in some of these atoms, but not always, and we don't know when. it's going to happen at some point, but it's really indeterminate. And we have no idea how or where these things are coming from, because all these atoms, as far as we can tell, are entirely identical. And so, therefore, people conclude from this that the certain things that happen within the realm of quantum mechanics prove that things don't need a cause, or that effects don't need a cause. Here's the problem. Quantum mechanics only shows that when it comes to subatomic particles, our observing of those particles always influence their behavior. And so it makes it impossible for us to determine their true causes. And now, what I'm referring to there, actually, something I just forgot to mention, sorry about that, is that the double slit experiment, where if you launch photons, if you throw photons at two targets, and you're observing it, what happens is that the photons cease to act like a wave and begin to act more like particles, and they collapse and go through nicely through the slits. If you don't observe it, what you find is that it works as that the photons act as a wave. This is very strange. I don't really understand it. I'm not entirely sure if I'm understanding the experiment itself, but all it's telling us is that observation somehow influences the behavior of these particles. We don't know how, but it doesn't say that they don't have a cause. Or when it comes to the decaying of atoms through radiation, even though it's completely indeterminate, it doesn't say that there's no cause whatsoever. It's just that we don't know. But we can also say, at the very least, that we can point to the formal cause of the uranium-238 atom with respect to its indeterminacy to losing or throwing off an alpha particle. In the same way that we can point to the form of a cat as to explain, or as the cause of why it chases laser pointers. And so a part of the formal causality and the action of the nature of uranium-238 is that it releases certain radiation particles at a certain indeterminate rate. There's nothing mysterious here. Now, this next objection is, I think, pretty important, and it's called existential inertia. And you guys read about it a bit in the McInerney book, and you can also look at the way McInerney deals with this, but I take it a slightly different approach. And that's partly because I'm approaching it from a slightly different angle than McInerney. So the objection is that it says that why can't a thing continue to exist without a sustaining cause of its existence? It seems that once a thing comes into existence, it plugs away just fine until it ceases to exist. And so, two things. One, it would have to exist in order to exist prior to its own existence to cause its own actus essendi. But, as we talked about before, this is a vicious circular regress and therefore impossible. One more bit of evidence. So we talk about even just on the physical order. Physical things require certain conditions, right? But when we're talking about physical things, we're going to have to be considering some cause of temporal delay. And so so whenever there's going to be something that goes out of existence because we've taken away certain physical conditions, there's always going to be some sort of continued survival of those things. And so, for instance, oxygen is a critical factor for my continued existence, but I don't immediately cease to exist if I'm suddenly thrown into a vacuum. The same goes for many other physical conditions that keep me alive: the temperature of the Earth, the distance of the Earth from the Sun, the amount of gravity the Earth has. All these different things are necessary for me to be alive. However, at some point, I would die. And so we can keep removing these various sufficient conditions, these various conditions. And even though if I'm thrown into a vacuum, which is a condition for my existence, it's going to be a little bit before I die. Not long, mind you, but I will at some point cease to exist there. What we do see is that whatever condition was necessary for my continued existence fails to obtain, because at some point I cease to exist. In either case, here's the thing. What we know is that it wasn't me causing my existence, because otherwise I would have never ceased to exist at all. And by that, I mean that if I were the cause of my own existence, if I wasn't relying on other things, then I wouldn't need anything else for me to exist in the first place, or exist subsequently after I begin to exist. So it's entirely insane, I guess, or it's not rational to think that a thing can continue to exist without the sustaining power of the first efficient cause, which causes other things to exist. Now I want to give a little bit more here real quick. And so let's think about inertial motion in physical things one more time and compare it to existential inertia. So when we look at the inertial motion in physical things, you can take the example of a pitcher throwing a ball. The existential inertia objection looks at the pitcher as a cause in fieri of the motion of the ball after it's been thrown. And so what the advocate of existential inertia is looking at is if you take up the ball and you throw it, you say that, well, the person who's arguing from existential inertia is saying that the ball has been thrown and it continues to move even though it'll eventually slow down. And so since we have motion on that order, that is through physical motion, why is or in continuance in inertia that way? Why is it that we can't have inertia with respect to existence once a thing has been brought into existence? Why is it that the thing can't continue in existence even without the actions of the first efficient cause, or the thing that brought into existence? But they're focusing on the wrong thing. They're looking at it in fieri, because after the ball is thrown, the ball happily flies to the catcher's mitt, even though the pitcher is no longer currently acting on the ball to make it move. And since the ball is subject to various principles of inertia, just like we talked about, there's no deep mystery as to why this would happen. In other words, the motion of the ball traveling at a certain speed presupposes the ball has a capacity for motion. But as an analogy to essay, this is the wrong focus. And there's a number of reasons for this. First, before we get there, we have to remember that the term essay is an infinitive verb. It is something of a metaphysical impulse that empowers an essence to act towards a more perfect grasp on its existence. If I can modify one of Aquinas' analogies or descriptions of essay is more akin to the accelerating of a ball than a ball that has been accelerated, because a ball that has been accelerated talks about it's cut off. Now, boom, here it is. The acceleration is done. But essay, and from this point on, it's in motion, but its acceleration has ceased to continue. Has ceased to move, ceased to be a part of it. With essay, it's an infinitive verb. It's something that's continually happening to it. So we can think about it this way instead. As the ball accelerates during the pitch, the pitcher adds the accidental determination of accelerating to the ball. Although the ball is by nature in motion to a certain extent, it does not have the capacity to accelerate itself. See where I'm going with this? The pitcher, however, does have a principle of self-acceleration that he imparts to the ball. Without the pitcher's continual action, then the ball's acceleration will immediately cease. Once the ball leaves the pitcher's hand, it loses the form of accelerating motion because it has no principle in its own nature that can retain or cause the act of accelerating. Hence, insofar as the pitcher accelerates the ball, he acts both as the per se cause of the ball's acceleration and the causa in esse of the ball having the accidental determination of acceleration. Bringing this back to possible beings or things that are having that have had their existing of the actus essendi caused in them, because their essence cannot begin to have esse by the principles of by their essence. They not only require initial cause in fieri, that is something that brings it into existence. So the pitcher brings the ball into acceleration. This is true. So whatever brings a thing into existence, which is ultimately God, and gives it this actus essendi, the same effect must also be the cause in esse to account for the continued effect of the things existing. Attributes that only depend attributes that only initially depend on their cause in fieri, and that are subsequent and posterior to the subject. What that means is that when we put the form of horseshoe into iron, the iron has taken on the form of horseshoe, but the accident is posterior to the iron. So the accident of the horseshoe being, or the iron being shaped as a horseshoe, or having the shape of horseshoe is dependent upon, or can be dependent upon, and continually reside in the iron because of the way the iron is. Here's something I think is great. Due to the priorities from guiding John Canassis, due to the priority of subject as a material cause, there is the possibility for an attribute caused in the subject by something else to continue in its adherence in the subject, at least for a time apart from its initiator, as is the case with the continued motion of the ball. I'm adding it a little bit here to match my analogy. On the other hand, when considering the priority of the essay to its subject, however, there is no chance to explain the continuance of the essay on the subject, which is like how the ball, which is akin to the ball being accelerated, is dependent upon the pitcher accelerating the ball currently. But unlike accelerating, essay is absolutely prior to its subject in every single way. Therefore, nothing could continue in existence were it not for the continual activity of some cause acting per se and in esse that continually causes a possible being to exist. In summary, then, when understood in the context of Aquinas' metaphysics of esse, possible beings are those which are those whose essential natures are open to esse and non-esse, so they're nothing in themselves. We find things of this kind, and when we find things of this kind existing in the real world, when we find things that could not be existing in the real world, their existence requires both a cause in fiere to bring them to existence and a cause in esse for their continued existence. And any appeal to existential inertia fails because the absolute priority of esse to essence completely excludes the possibility that a thing can become the cause of its own actus essendi even after it has come into existence. And again, I want to refer back to the question of the you locked yourself out of the car, but the keys are in the car, and so to get in the car, you need your keys. There's infinite regress here that's circular and vicious. A thing can never become the cause of its own actus essendi. There's a couple of objections here that I want you guys to address in this week's class. First, it's the objection that if everything needs a cause, then God needs a cause. How would Aquinas respond to that sort of argument? And these come from Bertrand Russell's argument, famous essay, Why I'm Not a Christian. You guys can find that online if you want it. If you can't find it, let me know. Second objection he has is, why do we need a beginning? Couldn't the universe just be ultimately infinitely old? And the third objection is, why can't the universe be the first cause? All of these things are found in the lecture, the answer to all of them. And so if you want the answer to those, you got to think about it. But I want you guys to work on it. Thank you.